So for this episode, I'm going to cheat a little. I've been known to play a little fast and loose when it comes to official lists sometimes. There was one great blunder on the old podcast with Film Fanatics, where we selected our favorite movie trilogies. I put one of mine as Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. Now, this is technically incorrect for a few reasons. Obviously, there are 6 Star Trek movies based on the original series, if you don't count the Abrams reboot, I guess. So selecting the second, third, and fourth movie isn't even technically correct in the sequence. Okay. Still, those 3 movies do form a trilogy within those series of films. However, the themes and some of the story beats are continued and resolved in the 6th film, so in a way it's more of a quartet. You see, I messed the whole thing up in multiple ways. I don't know if it's because I was being too contrarian, or I just kind of forgot the specifics of the list because I wanted to bring up Star Trek again in the podcast. But that's what's fun about making lists about the things we love. To a certain extent, we can bend the rules a bit. As you can see, I've gone off at a tangent already, though I promise this does have a point. My subscribers voted that the next movie I would discuss among my favorites would be Merlin, which is actually the 1998 miniseries. Yes, this is technically a miniseries, but I've always looked at it as a film that was just split up into 2 parts. For me, I feel like a series should be anywhere from 3 to 6 episodes, although 2 is technically a series, but I always watch this one in one long sitting, with the break almost being like an intermission. In any case, it's one of my favorite pieces of media. I've watched it again after a fair number of years in preparation for this video, uncertain of how it would hold up. For the most part, I still really enjoy it. I remember Merlin being advertised on television and my family being excited for it, though I had no idea if we knew it would be any good or not. Still, we watched the first part and were captivated by it enough to watch the second part the next night. Even though my channel and moniker have taken the name of the Wizard of Legend, I've often wondered if it was really fitting. I'm really more of a science fiction guy than a fantasy guy, to be honest, and the nickname was really given to me by a few subscribers trying to make sense of my random username. Still, I stuck with it, and perhaps it is still fitting. I've always enjoyed the concept of magic, having grown up with Harry Potter and the Redwall books, and falling in love with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. I also always enjoyed mythology and classic tales of knights fighting monsters, and the Arthurian tale always rang true to me as it has with many people over the centuries. Oddly, I haven't seen too many adaptations on screen that really held up to be very good. Excalibur is the only major one I can really think of, which I like for just being very strange and beautifully shot and composed. Merlin is also shot with a dreamlike fashion, though not as sharply stylized or narratively as unconventional as that earlier film. What drew me into this version and why it remains one of my favorites is that it tells the story of Merlin, the typically mysterious figure, and shows us his origins as well as the tale of King Arthur from his perspective. What might hold some people back from watching this is the fact that it's a television special from the 90s. However, I felt most of the effects actually held up pretty well. The biggest fault might be in the CGI, which for the time was actually pretty good. The dragon looked decent, although there was an attack by some griffins I did not think held up very well. You could make the argument that it looks cheaper than a big-budget studio film, but the props, sets, and costumes mostly really sell the world. Sometimes it does feel like I'm watching a big theater production, but I actually kind of like that. Other times I'm honestly surprised by the scale and beauty of the natural locations and models. What is most interesting is how the creators used various types of editing and lighting to create the strange otherworldly elements. There are a lot of quick fades and sped up framing with the magical creatures when they're introduced. There was one scene with water being raised that I wasn't sure if it was CGI or the frame being sped up, and I couldn't decide if I thought it was good or not. But it was still strange and otherworldly as Merlin is conversing with Mab about their conflict. So I guess it worked. There was also one unfortunate scene that was kind of offensive, involving the shape-shifting gnome Frick, played by Martin Short. It's a very brief scene, and I don't know if it was due to improv or part of the script. I kept thinking, oh no, why does this have to be here? It's so small that I don't think it ruins the whole piece, but it's a reminder that nothing is perfect. This film was nostalgic for me, and I did feel attracted to the concepts the film touches on: the battle of good and evil, the flow of time, love and loss, memories and dreams, and the struggle to do what is right, and the mistakes that are still made even by good people. Merlin, even though it's about magic, is really another tale of a man's life. Merlin is presented not as a mystical figure, but as a flawed man, recounting the beauty and sorrow of his life. In this version, Merlin is created by Queen Mab, a pagan deity who fears change and her own mortality. You see, as Christianity grows more prominent in Britain, people will stop believing in her, causing her to lose her influence and eventually fade from existence. This is a very interesting idea, and Mab's actions, even the evil acts she commits, are all in a futile attempt to prevent her own demise. This is an interesting contrast with the Lady of the Lake, who accepts her fate and refuses to help her sister. It's a very interesting theme that villains often can't come to grips with their mortality and lash out because of it. She creates Merlin to be a beacon to bring people back to her, but she's incapable of love and ends up causing death and destruction to pretty much everyone he cares about in his life. He swears revenge, and that's pretty much his motivation throughout most of the story. He doesn't want to stop Mab to make a better kingdom, he just wants to see her plans fail. I didn't really realize it until now, but Merlin is kind of another cautionary tale about revenge and how it often makes us what we hate. Even when trying to do the right thing, Merlin still does things similar to Mab, though he eventually shows regret for his mistakes. It might sound corny, but I also think Merlin is really about the power, or magic if you will, of love and compassion and faith in other people. The tale certainly covers the struggle of humanity and that we often make our own worst mistakes, but even in this strange world of ancient magic and the mysteries of nature, human beings are capable of great acts and great ideas. One of my favorite scenes is where King Arthur has just been revealed to have Excalibur as Uther's heir to the throne. One of the nobles refuses to accept it, and a war between the supporters is inevitable. Before the battle begins, young Arthur goes up to face the other army and says he doesn't want bloodshed. He offers the sword to the noble and says that if he believes it is his right, to take it and kill Arthur.
This is Excalibur, the sword of the true king. If you believe you have a right to it, take it. And kill me.
I feel like this act alone would have swayed most, but of course Excalibur sings its weird song, and the man sees the error of his ways. The war ends before it can begin. What an awesome idea. You see mankind having to take hold of its destiny and work to make a better world. For those of you who know the lore, there is plenty of betrayal and sadness before it's done, but Merlin leaves you with the idea that perhaps it was all well worth it, and ends in a pretty happy, if not slightly bittersweet ending. Before I wrap up, I must also mention the score. Merlin's opening theme captures the epic but also somber and reflective tone of the whole piece. There is also the cast. You've got some greats in there, like Isabella Rossellini as Merlin's love interest. Martin Short has one of the best arcs in the movie as Mab's main henchman and Merlin's magic teacher. Helena Bonham Carter is Morgan Le Fay. Rutger Hauer is a villain, of course. James Earl Jones voices the Rock of Ages, because of course he does.
Merlin, it seemed you were here only a moment ago.
My lord, this man claims Excalibur.
Who is it?
Arthur, only son of Uther, and rightful king of Britain.
Why give him the sword? He will betray the people just as his father did.
I don't know what I'll do, or what I'll become. Only what I am.
A wise answer.
I had a wise teacher.
He will destroy the old ways. You will be forgotten, just like the rest of us.
That is your fear, not mine. I cannot die. I am the matches. I will live forever on the edge of dreams.
And Lena Headey has an early role as Guinevere. Overall, a much nicer character than in Game of Thrones, most would agree. What really holds this thing together the most, though, is Sam Neill's performance as Merlin. For most people, he's Dr. Grant from Jurassic Park, or maybe that insurance guy from Mouth of Madness. But for me, he'll always be the most iconic for Merlin. He just has such a presence about him, like there's all this power that's about to rise up, but coolly subdued by his demeanor.
Are you going to use some of your magic on me, Merlin?
I'll kill you any way I can, Vortigern. But I will kill you.
He does go a little over the top sometimes.
I'll see you fade into nothing!
His narration might be one of the most comforting things to hear, as the frame is an older Merlin recounting his tale.
I fostered him with Sir Hector.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, by others...
I was his tutor. I didn't teach him magic. I taught him ethics and morals.
living creatures.
Which is much more difficult, believe me.
Watching it again, I do think the first half is a bit stronger than the second, as the second part is mostly about the King Arthur story. It's mostly serviceable. They tell pretty much the whole story in 90 minutes with room for Merlin's personal character conflicts. Still, if they wanted to flesh out more elements, they could, but then again, this is Merlin's story, not Arthur's, so I guess it makes sense. Overall, Merlin is still one of my favorite pieces of media and one of the few really good versions of the Arthur tale out there, ironically. I still really love it, and some of the sadder moments did make me tear up a bit. Perhaps most of all, I like what it reminded me of why I still love entertainment and the arts so much. I watched this when I was about 8 or 9 for the first time, enthralled by the magic and the basic ideas of the story, but still able to relate to the characters and their struggles in some way, even as a child. Now, much older, I see the story as an adult and it hits me in many of the same ways, and in other ones that I hadn't picked up on before. Even if the story is the same, it's interesting to see what we'll interpret differently, but also what core concepts are still the same, which keep us coming back, like visiting an old friend after a long time. That's the real magic of filmmakers, artists, and storytellers in general. Stories help us see things from other points of view when it may be hard to otherwise. They can help us unite through ideas that we can all relate to, despite our differences. It can take us to other worlds we could only imagine before, to inspire us and maybe even remind us what is most important. Anyway, that's why I love Merlin, the 1998 miniseries. Check it out if you haven't. It's probably worth a watch.